West African heads of state have said all options, including the use of force, remain on the table to restore constitutional order in Niger, and that's after the July the 26th coup, and order the activation of a standby force. Thanks for joining us. This is Standpoint. I am Precious Amayo. Now, since the July the 26th overthrow of Nigeria's democratic leadership, the coup plotters have refused to relinquish power and release detained President Bazoum, ignoring an August the 6th deadline from ECOWAS to reinstate him. As a result of ECOWAS, 15-member Economic Community of West African States met in Nigeria's Abuja on Thursday for an emergency summit to discuss responses to last month's military takeover in Niger. That's after the coup leaders defied their earlier threats to use force to restore democracy. Now, another resolution in the deployment is the deployment of the ECOWAS standby force, and that's making a lot of people apprehensive. They say that would restore constitutional order in the Republic of Niger, immediately followed by another that spoke of restoring such order through peaceful means. Again, it looks like ECOWAS said all options are on the table. Now, ECOWAS also pledged to enforce sanctions and travel bans on those preventing the return to power of democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum. Like I said earlier, borders have been closed. Nigerians are apprehensive. People are wondering how long this is going to take, especially for those who live in border communities. It's also taking an impact or having an impact on Niger because there are sanctions, power cuts, border closure. All of these are affecting livelihoods and businesses. But let's look at what this means for Africa, what it means for ECOWAS, and then the international community. Let's bring in Professor of Africa Studies and Political Science, Professor Toyin Falola, in the studio. Good to have you join us.
Thank you, Precious. Toyin Falola.
All right, let's also bring in Global Affairs Analyst Nweke from Belgium. He joins us via Zoom. Good to have you join us. All right, so let's take a short break. We understand that I understand we have to take a short break to get in Nweke to the conversation. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us. Well, let's get back to reactions to post-coup developments in Niger. Perhaps the first time in recent history we are seeing ECOWAS react swiftly like this and in strong terms. I still have in the studio Professor of African Studies and Political Science, Toyin Falola, and then we'll have Nweke joining us now via Zoom from Belgium. But let me begin with Prof in the studio. Prof, like I just said, it's perhaps the first time in recent history we're seeing this kind of reaction from ECOWAS, because this is not the first coup in West Africa, and in even recent history, not the first. Why is ECOWAS reacting in strong terms in this manner, and what do you make of his recent resolution?
Thank you very much. Remember, they got involved in the Gambia. They threatened Burkina Faso, and they threatened Mali.
But not with the use of force.
But they threatened. And you know ECOWAS is still in the Gambia, trying to protect their president, the current president. They have not relocated the army. But in terms of how this is arranged, this is the most extensive, saying that if you don't return to democracy within 9-10 days, we are going to attack you. They've never done that before. And then a series of sanctions. They did impose sanctions on Burkina Faso and Mali, bear that in mind, which have not been lifted. But this is very extensive. But has it produced the results? No, it has not. It's yet to produce the results they want.
And this recent resolution, do you think that, look, it will produce the result that they want?
Well, because they put the wrong foot first. So in international relations and diplomacy, the use of force, the threat of force, we call it the nuclear option. You generally don't start with a nuclear option. Because once you do not carry out your threat, then you've discredited yourself. So they are now in a position in which they have been discredited. How they are going to move forward is problematic. Because they've ignored various dimensions. And there are going to be more coups, by the way. This is not going to be the last. And some of what they're trying to do is also to protect themselves and to send signals to their own armies that if you overthrow us, maybe other countries will come and get rid of you.
But I will get to the indications, because you're saying that there are going to be more coups anyway. But I will get to indications, in just a moment. But let me bring in Mr. Collins Nweke. Mr. Collins Nweke, these recent resolutions by ECOWAS, what does it say to you? Because on one hand, ECOWAS say, look, all options are on the table. Use, peaceful resolution. On the other hand, it has activated, its force. What does it say to you in terms of the direction that ECOWAS is looking to take?
Thank you, Precious. What it does say to me is the fact that ECOWAS has decided in this instance to do two things. Number one, they have a strong desire to depart from that epitaph that has stuck on them, and that is toothless bulldog. They simply talk and they never act. I think there is the strong desire now to shed off that unholy epitaph that is hanging very, very strongly against them, and for very good reasons. And that is why they have decided that we're going to play tough, we're going to send a strong message. Of course, the downside to that strategy or approach is the fact that, rather than using the nuclear rather than using or deploying diplomacy, they have decided to use the nuclear force like Professor Falola referred to. That is a miscalculation. Now, on the other hand, while using that nuclear option, they have also decided that they are going to give them what they call the olive branch on the left hand and the gun on the right hand, and saying to them, choose which one is more convenient for you. In the end, number one, they are protecting themselves, and number two, by actually sending the strong message that if it happens in Niger, there is the propensity that it will happen in Nigeria, and so we need to send a strong message that it will not be tolerated by ECOWAS. And so number two, it is also a negotiating tool in terms of saying to them, okay, the use of force like we threatened is not coming on board immediately, but diplomacy remains an option and you better choose that diplomacy. Now, it remains to be seen what exactly they are going to do to define that content, the content of that diplomatic side of their strategy. In the coming weeks, in the coming months, that will become clearer.
And Mr. Nweke, how much time does ECOWAS have in that diplomatic window, seeing that, look, the junta has already started forming a government, they've announced the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, so one wonders how much time ECOWAS has in that diplomatic window?
ECOWAS will not tell us how much window of opportunity they are giving to them to explore exhaustively the nuclear option. But from the reality on the ground, we are able to actually discern how long it is going to take. For a start, Nigeria, being the dominant economy within ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African country, is not ready. They are not ready because, for a start, the National Assembly of Nigeria has more or less said, sorry, we're not buying into the use of force. Number two, they have proceeded on recess. They are not reconvening until about end of September. So which means that the earliest that a resolution is going to be seen in terms of domesticating the resolution of ECOWAS leadership would be end of September, of course, unless they decide to call them back from recess. But I don't see much appetite in that regards. Now, other member states of ECOWAS would also have to, in terms of their parliament, would have to actually approve the use of force. So, we
have seen that the difference in terms of policy. Some have said, look, let us explore the diplomacy. some of these member states have said we do not support the use of force. We want to explore diplomacy. But let me come back to Prof. Mr. Nweke. Prof.
Yes.
When you look at how ECOWAS has termed this coup, they call it an attempted coup. But some people say, look, at this point, it is no longer handover to Bazoum. It is more of how much time are you going to stay in office, and when are you going to conduct elections? That's the conversation. Do you agree that, look, right now, that diplomatic window is fast closing?
Well, there is no good option at this time, because we cannot call them coup plotters anymore. They're the one who have the power. It's a government. A government can be in place the year of default, but it's the power. It's the people you have to negotiate with. So they are no longer coup plotters. They're the government. Second, they have many approaches to follow. The do option, the Rawlings option, there's so many approaches. If you attack them, they're going to kill all the previous politicians.
And they have threatened
they will kill them. So if you attack them, suppose you succeeded. When you break it, you have to fix it. Are you going to put the ECOWAS force there forever? Are you going to write a new constitution for them and ask politicians to go and compete for election? In the interim, are you the government? So who is going to govern the place? And remember, there are so many other issues around this we don't talk about. The previous president before now wanted a third term. Just as we had that experience in Nigeria, he didn't get his third term. So he installed his friend there. And he put his son as a cabinet member. He had mining interest. His son has mining interest. So people are not looking at the undercurrents of this situation. The country runs like a mafia.
Which is some, not just that country. Some countries in West Africa have people have talked about the governance deficit.
Yes.
Which is, they have said that, look, this is the reason we're seeing this support, and not just the coup, but the popular protest in support of these coups. That is because of the governance deficit, and perhaps ECOWAS should be focusing on that, as the best option.
Yeah, but they can't focus on that because they are also experiencing the same. One of the presidents that attended the meeting in Abuja is very notorious. He changed the constitution, put himself in power. So you can also see their own self-interest. Who among them has the mandate to govern? People in Ghana no longer.
But we understand that, look, ECOWAS played a very significant role in ensuring that President Macky Sall doesn't seek a third term, and that they helped to douse that tension. So to ECOWAS' credit, it is also assisting in terms of helping governance and democracy thrive.
Well, people will argue that the opposition was so strong for him, and the Marabout are also so strong. The credit we are going to give to ECOWAS on that is very limited. Remember, the composition of ECOWAS is made of the people that the president sent. They are the friends of the presidents. So the ECOWAS is not a representative of you and I, but a representation of the power that we criticize. It's a collection of the friends of the presidents. They're not appointed on people's election. The ECOWAS is just a representation of the bad governance in those respective countries as well. But there are dimensions in terms of what are the implications for Nigeria, which is far more important to us than to ECOWAS. So when you close the borders, whom are you punishing? I study international trade flow. I know the trade flow. It's Nigerians that benefit more from this trade. It's not Nigerian. People carry goods from Lagos, from Kano to Niger. We have 5 states that border on the country, stretching 1,300 kilometers long. Whom are you punishing? The electricity we provide, part of which the country has broken because it's building a dam, is a gift based on an understanding that we are not going to dam the River Niger. If they dam the River Niger, if Mali dams the River Niger, if everybody dams the River Niger, you're not going to have this electricity you are enjoying. And if you do, it's going to be at a higher cost. And then you know how many refugees Niger is keeping for us? Internally displaced people, over 300,000. Whoever is in power will just create more refugees for you. Your people are complaining they have no food. They have no. People are complaining about inflation and poverty level, which has outstripped that of India. And then you are going to receive more refugees from Niger if you attack them. So the consequences. This is a policy that they have not thought about carefully. In other words, they're just thinking in terms of their own specific interests, so that they don't get overthrown themselves. Because they have legitimacy governance deficit in all these countries.
Let's bring in Mr. Nweke. Mr. Nweke, Prof seems to be talking about the implications for Nigeria. And, some will say, look, the president came in at a time where he immediately came into office, less than 45 days, as it were. He was already he was voted the ECOWAS chairman, and he has to now focus on both his country and the region. And so people are saying that those who are saying just focus on Nigeria and ignore all of these issues. But he is, the chairman. And so I'm wondering, from your end, what do you think that, this means for Nigeria, implication for Nigeria, and if it is all worth it?
It is thoroughly worth it. And the reason is because it keys into Nigeria foreign policy trusts, and that is concentratism. They want to be regional power in Africa, and in more ways than one, they have shown that over the years. And it is in Nigeria's best interest that they continue to provide leadership in Africa, especially when it concerns a country that actually shares border with 7 states of Nigeria. Like Professor Falola mentioned, the intertrade between Niger and Nigeria is humongous. So it is in everybody's interest, as a matter of fact, that this is sorted out in the most amicable manner with minimal disruption to lives and livelihood, as well as trade and investment in that region. So yes, it is worth it. Now, on the part of President Bola Tinubu, I believe that they may have started off wrongly by sending Mr. Abdul Salem, the former Nigerian leader, as a delegate or envoy, whatever epitaph they want to give it, to Niger. They should have started lower, and I believe that in their desire to actually send a strong message protecting themselves, because as you know, we have talked about this several times in the past, Precious, that ECOWAS, just like AU, is a club of tired old men who are there for their own interests. So in their hurry to protect their interests, I think there was a very, very serious misstep by the delegation that they sent, rather than starting from junior officers who incidentally are classmates of these military juntas in Niger. They are on first name basis, and so they would have been able to prepare the table, set the stage for the big guns like Abdul Salem and the rest of them to come on board. Now, the window of opportunity they have now that they have known that the military juntas in Niger have ignored them, is now to take the time to begin to explore a more genuine way those diplomatic options that are still open to them. Now, the time when it was assumed that you can scare the those in charge in Niger with the threat of war, that time is gone and buried. That is not going to happen. So the second option is transitional arrangement, which is how long are you going to be there, and what plans do you have in place to install, democracy, then achieving that, democratic order that, they talked about. So that is the reality.
All right, and we see that, some of these countries where, you have military leaders, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, and now, almost like a coalition. And, it's funny because some have said, look, France perhaps also has to check its colonial legacy in Africa. When you look at some of these countries, they're all former French colonies in recent history. And, even since 1990, 78% of the countries where coups have happened have been, former French colonies. Prof, is this a problem of that legacy of French colonialism?
So, when Haiti got its independence years ago, France imposed a yearly payment. And it was a few years ago that they just finished that payment. In other words, it bankrupted the first independent black country in the Americas. If we review the contract they signed with all these countries, they were very, very backward policies. You must use our army. We have the right to, you must use our currency. You must keep your reserve in our country. We have the right to station an army in your country, which they did. Take two examples. Mali has gold. It has no gold reserve. France has gold reserve. It has no gold. Niger has uranium. Other countries are saying, we can pay you 5 times more than what France is paying you. That we would convert some of what we are paying you into development money. No. The US has, I hope you are aware, one of the most extensive drone station in Niger. Niger has gold. So the young men and women, I know the place. In fact, a week before that coup, one of the ministers has asked me to convene a big conference for them on some of these issues. So there's anger, and it's part of the process of independence that was not completed years ago. A process that the young men and women want to be concluded in their favor. The time that you can, thanks to education, thanks to the internet, thanks to social media, the time that you can fool young men and women, that time is gone, because they know far more than people think they know. And they know the forces internal destroying their countries, and they know the forces external destroying their countries. So they're fighting two battles. They're fighting former colonial masters, cheating them, exploiting them. 88 billion leave Africa every year. 88 billion US dollars, illicit transfer of money. And then the former president wrote a piece in Washington Post that they rely on 40% foreign aid. That is very insulting, because that foreign aid they give them is part of the money they've made from them. They will never give you their own money. It doesn't work like that. It's part of the scam of selling their products and giving them part of the profit and calling it aids to pretend as if they are contributing to their development. So we do not know how these things will unfold, but it's just more than what ECOWAS is doing.
But should ECOWAS, Prof, just fold his hands and watch things unfold? And bearing in mind that, look, all of these countries and have, are members, these member states have signed the ECOWAS protocols.
Yes.
And look, this is no longer about individuals.
Yes.
It is now about the institution, and that institution should be strengthened. And that's, first of all, democracy.
The first thing is ECOWAS should protect good governance and fight for democracy in all countries, not when we have a coup. Cameroon is ripe for a coup under Biya. Central African Republic is ripe for a coup.
When you say ripe for a coup, because a lot of people will find that statement, a bit off, Prof. And this is why. Because, in a democracy,
yes,
there are instruments one can use,
yes,
to remove constitutionally a leader. One of them is, just a minute, Prof. One of them is elections. You wait for the end of that tenure, yes, and say, look, whether it's first term, we do not want you for a second term. Another is impeachment.
Yes.
There are a lot of instruments people can use,
yes,
but not a coup, because some people will say, look, when you are, the legacy that military leadership leaves,
yes,
it takes years, yes, and it's even worse off when it comes to corruption.
There are arguments that we don't need coups, right? But how do you remove Biya from power? So say, if you have 40-year-old in Cameroon, the only president you've known is Biya, who is in his 90s. So if Biya were to be overthrown today, people would just jump to the street in millions because he has not provided you with the opportunities to rid him of power. So ECOWAS has to worry about issues of governance in all these countries. That's preeminent. Arguments about poverty elimination. Arguments about the widening gap between the rich and poor. Because those are the conditions that lead to the coup. In the current case, some of the reasons are flimsy. Because, first of all, we are not sure that this man won the election. I hope you know that. Because the most popular candidate was not allowed to compete. There were fake charges brought against him. Remember, there was a coup 2 months before this guy was installed. So it's not as if, when you have democracy on paper and it doesn't work, you are not given sufficient opportunities for your citizens to know the best options for them. So what should they do? Which we should focus upon. And they've done this before. Okay. They should have extracted a promise. We will go back to democratic rule, the democratic rule in quote, very early, and convert them into a temporary transitional government to restore that democracy. They're not going to bring that guy back. That one is very clear to them. Remember, if you look at the list of ministers, if you look at the guy who overthrew him, he was his left-hand man for 10 years and that of his predecessor. So they have their own complicated internal politics and internal dynamics that foil this. And Jamel, many of them, they've changed their uniform, they've changed their military uniform to a democratic uniform. They can say, okay, well, we're going to allow you to compete in the election. And if you win, resign from the army. And that pattern we see.
Why not resign from the army first before you compete? But let me bring in Mr. Collins Nweke. Mr. Collins Nweke, the conversation really is maladministration and governance deficits, which we understand, is rife in some African countries. But is that enough for one to support a coup? And then what should ECOWAS be doing now? Because Prof has raised the issue of some countries where, look, people are also tired of that kind of governance. What should ECOWAS be doing now to address those kind of issues?
For a start, a coup is an aberration, and there cannot be any justifiable reason for a coup to take place in a country. Now, there are, like you pointed out there, Precious, other means of getting rid of a government that is not doing what it ought to be doing. But we do know that those instruments, those democratic instruments, don't work in Africa because those in power have managed to stifle the system such that they have rendered those instruments impotent. And so the best place to start would be strengthening the governance instrument, the governance structure. That is number one. Then number two, issues around fighting poverty and all of that have got to come on the front burner because an uneducated population is one that actually support the wrong choices for them. A coup is a bad choice. And when you see people in the streets of Niamey, Niger, actually waving the flag of Russia, welcoming them into Niger, that simply tells you that they are getting rid of an imperialist arrangement, which is France, and now are welcoming another imperialist arrangement. For Christ's sake, what tells you that Russia under Putin is going to be different from France under Emmanuel Macron?
Especially with his expansion tendencies.
Well, what even tells you, Ada, that the gentleman, Tiani, that has seized power, is going to deliver on the promises of giving them the good life And what tells you that it's not going to be even more corrupt than the democratic leader that he overthrew? So you see, you have the military coup, but you also have civilian coup, because in some of these African countries, if not most of these African countries that we're talking about, elections are rigged. People, civilians actually force themselves into power. Nigeria, for instance, in the last, several years, in the last decade or so, the court of law has got to determine who becomes Nigeria's president rather than the electorate. That also is much of an aberration as a military coup. And all of these have
But at the end of the day, one will say, look, it is still constitutional. Whether as long as it is a court and not a coup, it's at least more acceptable than when you have a coup. But I want to leave it there. I know you want to conclude your thought, Mr. Collins Nweke, but I do have to leave it there. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And Prof, I just want to give you maybe a minute to take on this, because you raised the point. It looks like, some parts of Africa are making Russia the new savior. Is Russia the new savior when you look at the expansionist tendencies of Russia? And then are we also seeing the last vestiges of the French legacy, colonial legacy in Africa?
No country is going to develop your country for you. All of them have their agenda, and they've always had. So Russia cannot be a savior, China cannot be a savior, French have never been saviors, the British have not been saviors. We have to develop our own countries ourselves on our own terms, with our own talents, with our own human capacity. And we are very intelligent, and we have to change the culture of leadership and the culture of followership. That's the only solution.
Prof, it was an interesting conversation with you, with Mr. Collins Nweke, Professor of African Studies and Political Science, Toyin Falola. Thank you so much for talking to us. I'm sure we're going to have you more often to discuss some of these issues in Africa.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you, Precious.